At independence, Kenya had only 6 envoys across the world. Only one is still alive, Burudi Nabwera. He was sent to the US at the age of 36, and his memory is still fresh on what Kenya wanted from the world then.
I had never been trained to be an ambassador. I had been just a public servant. We were given some initial training on what the jobs of being an ambassador entailed.
But 56 years later, what has changed?
The world we live in is no longer divided into the groups that we started with.
Yes, Kenya's first envoys and how the country's foreign policy has changed over the years through the eyes of Burudi Nabwera, who we met at his rural home in Kiminini, Trans Nzoia County. But first, here is our fact sheet.
The 6 envoys Kenya's first president Mzee Jomo Kenyatta picked to represent Kenya across the globe are Josephat Karanja, who was at the United Kingdom, Henry Muli went to China, Theophilus Kosgei, Egypt, Adala Otuku, the then Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, current-day Russia, Levi Madoka Shako went to France, and Burudi Nabwera was sent to the United States and the United Nations. Nabwera served for 2 terms. His tour of duty ended in 1969. After his service in the US, Nabwera served as Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs under the late Dr. Njoroge Mungai from 1969 to 1974. He served in President Daniel Arap Moi's government as Minister of State in charge of provincial administration. He was later moved to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. Nabwera was a member of parliament for Lugari from 1988 to 1992. President Mwai Kibaki appointed him chair of Nzoia Sugar Company, a position he held from 2003 to 2009. He is now the vice chair of Luhya Elders Forum that brings together 18 Luhya sub-tribes. For Fact Sheet, my name is Elijah Mwangi.
Karibu.
Burudi Nabwera is enjoying his retirement. We spent a day with him at his rural home in Kiminini, Trans Nzoia County, to tap into his knowledge about Kenya's national interest abroad.
Kule kwetu reserve ya Western.
Nabwera, who is 92 years old, is rarely referred to as Ambassador Nabwera, but he is an ambassador whose legacy cannot be ignored. The father of 5 studied sociology at the London School of Economics after his first degree at Makerere University. His memoirs are contained in his autobiography titled How It Happened. So, being Kenya's first ambassador to the US at the age of 36, we sought to find out just how did it happen.
I was a novice. I had never been trained to be an ambassador. I had been just a public servant. So we were given some initial training on what the jobs of being an ambassador entailed.
So what were you told was going to be your job?
Under Kenyatta, one of the major things in America, each ambassador had to make sure you are to reflect the national image of being a nationalist. But number 2, to countries now leave the UN, because UN was international politics. What I was doing at UN was international. But what I was doing in the United States was to cultivate friendship between Kenya and the United States and go flat out to look for investments from the Americas, from the United States first and the Americans in general, new investments to build up the economy of Kenya.
So when you went to Washington, D.C., was everything set for you, or you went to begin a new office? What did you find there, and how did it progress?
We started completely afresh. I found when Peter Icharia, who was my deputy in Washington, had gone and opened an embassy. He had recruited some local staff, but the other officers were to be posted later from home. He went there as a third secretary, but over the period he moved up. He improved to second secretary until he was first secretary. But then we had enough staff to be. We built from one officer to, by the time I left, we had about 6 officers in Washington.
So at the UN and also at the Washington, D.C., who did you present your credentials to?
At the United Nations, I had to present my credentials to the Secretary General, who was then, at that time, was Uthant from Burma, and for Washington, the president then was President Lyndon Baines Johnson. In my case, therefore, if we had an agreement to sign with Brazil or Mexico or Canada or in the Caribbean, I would be the one nearest there, so I would be asked to go and do that, go and sign.
Balozi, what were the diplomatic issues then at independence?
Foreign policy of Kenya was threefold at that time, at independence. One was an attempt to treat East Africa as one country, because when Tanzania and Uganda got their independence, they were waiting for getting independence so that we could federate. So the instructions, even when we went to UN, the instruction from the Kenya government was that Kenya government's policies, Kenya government's tactics must be to strengthen that East African unity. The second area where the president wanted us to emphasize was to bring African together. So under the Organization of African Unity, the President Kenyatta was very keen on making sure that Kenya worked within that system. Then, of course, a big one that was the non-aligned group. There was a group of countries from Asia, Latin America, and Africa that worked together in the non-aligned movement. So it was a three-pronged approach: East Africa, Africa, non-aligned, and then the UN. And generally speaking, we voted as a group. And if the non-aligned movement were voting on one issue, we voted like that. Because these groups were important, because at that time, the world was divided into the Western countries led by the United States as a superpower, and the communist countries led by the Soviet Union, and China was with the Soviet Union for some time until they disagreed. Then China went east.
And so, which means at that time you are grappling with the challenges of the Cold War.
We were dealing with the major problem at the UN was the Cold War. Yes.
How did you navigate through that?
That is working through the three groups. If you try to do it on your own, because they call the Soviets and Soviet Union and the Americans were interested in getting countries under their sphere of influence. So the non-aligned movement protected us to say that if the Russians were doing what was right, we would support. And if the Americans, but we would not automatically support the Russians or automatically support the Americans.
So what foundation did you leave? Looking back then and now, how has Kenya's relationship with America evolved?
I think I'm happy and comfortable that at the beginning, I was one of the officers that were posted to America to start to cultivate relations between the two countries. And at the foundation, that the officers who are there with me, Peter Ichari and all those that who came and worked under me, and my successors, and the officers of the did a good job, to the extent that the relations between our two countries today are smooth. And it's just now trade and economic cooperation. And for up to the extent of getting some of our security needs from the US and all of those other friendly countries that help us. Mm-hmm. And so looking back, I look back with pride that I was one of the founders of the founding team that established relations between the United States of America, a superpower, and the Republic of Kenya.
Okay. And when you are serving in the US, who was the foreign affairs minister?
I served under Murumbi, I served under Mzee Koinange. Robert Ouko was permanent secretary when I was serving at the UN, yes.
Eventually, Balozi, Unep came to Nairobi. Unep had an office in Nairobi, and this, I think, is in early 70s. Did you play any role in bringing Unep to Nairobi?
No, that was after I'd left. The Unep came under my successor, Joey, Odero Joey. Odero Joey did a wonderful job at the UN. He's one of our best performers at the UN. I said, if you read the history of Kenya, when the history of Kenya comes to be written about our representation, Joey was one of the best.
Interesting reflections there on Kenya's first envoys and Mzee Jomo Kenyatta's style. But what has changed 56 years later?
The current situation is a complete somersault. The world we live in is no longer divided into the groups that we started with. The world we live in is now we deal with individual countries.
We have more from Balozi Burudi Nabwera right after the break. Welcome back. Today we are looking at how Kenya's foreign policy has changed 56 years after independence, and our special guest is Kenya's first ambassador to the US, Burudi Nabwera. He was sent there at the age of 36. We spent time with him at his rural home in Kiminini, Trans Nzoia County. And before we continue, let us just take you back and look at how Kenya's missions have changed over the years. From 6 ambassadors in 7 missions at independence to about 50 ambassadors in 56 missions. In Africa, Kenya has 20 missions. In Europe, 13. Middle East, 10. Asia and Australia, 7. And Americas, 5. Some ambassadors represent Kenya in more than one country. The diplomat's main role is to articulate Kenya's national interest. Some of them are career diplomats, others are political appointees.
Foreign affairs is the window through which the world sees Kenya. It is also the doorway through which the world interacts with Kenya. It is here at Foreign Affairs that Kenya commands a bird's eye view of the world.
Kenya has had 17 ambassadors in the US so far. Similarly, the US has had 17 ambassadors to Kenya since Kenya's independence. The 17 Kenyan ambassadors who have served in the US are Burudi Nabwera, Leonard Kibinge, Bernard Adundo, Ernest Mungai, John Mbogwa, Gideon Uku, Wafula Wabuge, Sospita Mageto, and Dennis Afande. Others are Benjamin Kipkorir, Samson Chemai, Yusuf Nzibo, Leonard Ngaithe, Peter Ogego, Elkana Odembo, Robinson Githae, and now Lazarus Amayo. Remember, we still have more from our guest, Balozi Burudi Nabwera. But before we continue, Elijah Mwangi has a special report on Kenya's priorities abroad as stated by the various ambassadors we've met during our trips abroad.
Let's start with a country that also doubles up as a continent, Australia. Here, we met Isaiah Kabira, who serves as the ambassador of Australia and New Zealand.
For us as Kenya, we have defined our relations through what we call teams. That is trade, tourism, education, agriculture, health, mining, and security. Our target really has been to increase the trade. We have seen increased trade between Kenya and Australia in the last few years. We have seen increased investments in the mining sector. We are happy that the biggest investor in Kenya's mining sector is a company that is actually based here in Western Australia.
From Australia, we shift focus to the United Nations headquarters in New York. Lazarus Amayo is Kenya's outgoing permanent representative here as he awaits accreditation to move to Washington, D.C. as Kenya's ambassador to the U.S. He told the Chamwada report that one of Kenya's top priorities is to be elected again to the UN Security Council.
It is 20 years since Kenya was lastly in the Security Council. In fact, our last tenure was 97, 98. And this particular time, we are going in for the seat which is reserved for Eastern and Southern Africa. That seat currently is held by the Republic of South Africa. Prior to that, it was with the Federal Republic of Ethiopia. So it is our hope, and we sincerely look forward to being elected by member states to take over from South Africa in 2021-22, when the seat will revert back from Southern Africa to Eastern Africa.
We also met former ambassador to the US, Robinson Njeru Githae, before he was transferred to Vienna. He said emphasis on economic diplomacy had yielded good results.
Now, America is Kenya's largest destination of exports outside of Africa. And really outside of Africa, you are talking of Uganda and Tanzania. Yeah, we have overtaken Britain and other countries. Even more tourists. America now is the largest source of tourists for Kenya.
Closer home, South Africa is a strategic partner of Kenya in many areas. Kenyan High Commissioner here, Jean Kamau, told us that besides the economic ties, the High Commission is keen on diaspora policy.
We see the diaspora as a very important resource and channel for our country's development. So we encourage associations within the diaspora community as a way, first of all, of ensuring that there's a community, that wherever a member of the diaspora are with other Kenyans, that they get together as part of that community and have a base on which they can address their problems, they can meet regularly, they can support each other as, you know, in the foreign country where they're living for their own personal interest.
In Botswana, we met High Commissioner Mohamed Chidie.
Our relationship with Botswana has been very warm, very cordial, very friendly. And we've done many good things together, Kenya and Botswana. Our visions is to maintain that relationship and to spur economic growth. The current diplomacy is based more on economy to exploit all the opportunities that are there between Kenya and Botswana.
Yes. And those are just sample priorities from Kenyan ambassadors that we have interacted with in the past. In general, the envoys are tasked to push Kenya's national interests in line with 5 major interlinked pillars: economic, environmental, peace, cultural, and diaspora. And this is according to foreign policy blueprint. For the Chamwada Report, my name is Elijah Mwangi.
Thank you, Elijah. That gives us a rough picture of Kenya's current international priorities. And we are still posing this question. 56 years after independence, what has changed?
The current situation is a complete somersault. The world we live in is no longer divided into the groups that we started with. The world we live in is now we deal with individual countries. The Americans don't exercise the power that they had then. The Soviet Union is gone. Now we're dealing with the individual countries, and the major emphasis now is economic cooperation. Kenyatta government was very economic on using, well, we were not rich enough, but also I think philosophically President Kenyatta did not like the idea of appointing so many ambassadors. For example, if you talk to President Kenyatta at his time that we should have a high commissioner to Kampala and a high commissioner to Dar es Salaam, he would laugh at you. He would say, what is there that these people are going to do that I cannot discuss with Nyerere? Why should I have a high commissioner in Dar es Salaam when I can pick up my phone and discuss with Nyerere what I want, or discuss with your bot what you have said? So for him, the strategy was to go very slowly in establishing foreign missions. And initially, foreign missions had to be in those countries that we had a lot to do in terms of investment and other activities, so that Kenya would be benefiting more. An embassy to President Kenyatta meant that Kenya had to get more inflow than outflow. And that is why later on, during his rule, later on, all ambassadors were recalled to Nairobi to take their leave. But before that, you had to have a session with the president. All the ambassadors had to have a session with the president, each one of them giving a verbal report on your performance, what was happening at your station, how much you had been able to achieve, what investments you had brought to Kenya, and then the plan. Then after that, under President Jomo Kenyatta, the ambassadors who are now taken to various projects around the country that Kenya was attempting to do. So you have to go back when you had been educated on what our attempts are and what we should try to do, and instructed to do more to get more investment for Kenya.
With that, we come to the end of this show that coincided with celebrations marking Kenya's 56 years of independence. Many thanks to our guest, Burudi Nabwera, who was Kenya's first ambassador to the US at the age of 36. Many thanks too to our broadcasting partner, KTN News Channel. And on behalf of the entire Chams media crew that made this production possible, see you again next time.